Jamie Shea, a former Deputy Assistant Secretary-General in NATO's Emerging Security Challenges Division, and he's also a Senior Fellow at the Friends of Europe think tank. Jamie, always good to have you with us. Welcome back. I just wanted to follow up on what Jeff was just talking about, the response in Europe, this sort of balance between cynicism and optimism. How do you feel, first of all, that this decision to move potentially away from a shorter-term ceasefire to a fuller peace deal, how do you think that is being seen here in Europe?
Well, I don't think that this is something which the Europeans, any more than President Zelensky of Ukraine, particularly wants, because what Russia is talking about when it talks about a comprehensive peace agreement is something that, first of all, would take Ukraine very much out of the Western orbit and turn it into a Russian satellite state, not just a loss of territory to Russia, but in fact the rest of Ukraine would no longer be oriented towards NATO or the EU. But it's that when Putin talks about a comprehensive peace agreement, he also includes things like, removing troops, NATO troops from NATO's eastern member states, for instance, major disarmament on the NATO side, which would considerably reduce NATO's ability to defend against Russia. And the other thing I think was well pointed out by your correspondent just a few moments ago, this would, because the two sides, Ukraine and Russia, are so far apart on what they consider to be a just peace, the negotiations would take a long time. Meanwhile, every time the Russians advanced on the battlefield, they would feel, hey, we're winning, so let's keep going. And because we're winning and Ukraine is losing, let's up the ante. So peace negotiations would be a dynamic process in which Russia would be coming back to the table every time asking for more.
And do you think there is growing appetite and acceptance of the idea that is a big talking point among the Europeans about security guarantees in the context of any potential peace deal? What would those security guarantees realistically look like?
Well, I think the first thing, of course, is to avoid a peace agreement which is fragile, open to different interpretations, shaky, leaving massive numbers of Russian troops on Ukrainian territory ready to strike again at a moment's notice, and forcing Ukraine, as was said a moment ago, to reduce its armed forces. So something which would reflect a parity, a balance of power, at least in the theatre between Ukraine and Russia. The second thing is that the Europeans in this coalition of the willing have been working for months on a plan to send European troops to Ukraine in the event of a peace agreement to help enforce the peace, also helping Ukraine with air cover, and also demining and access for its trade to the Black Sea. And the key thing, which is, I think, been a positive element in the relations between the Europeans and Trump over the last few days, is that the US now has expressed for the first time a willingness to provide a backstop, some kind of support to that European force. And that American guarantee would encourage more European countries to participate in it. So that's what we're really looking at when we talk of security guarantees. It's something that defends Ukraine well beyond a ceasefire or even a peace agreement.
And just briefly, Jamie, if you will, what would be a positive outcome, do you think, on Monday with President Zelensky meeting President Trump in the White House in Washington?
Well, I think that, clearly we've seen, as we always do with Donald Trump, a kind of seesaw or a pendulum motion where he meets the Europeans, he meets Ukraine and swings more to a principled, firm stance, saying he's going to get tough on Russia. Then he meets President Putin and goes to a much softer stance, as we saw in Alaska. So I think that what Zelensky will try to do with the Europeans on Monday is to get the pendulum to swing back to that principled, firmer stance, which is the willingness to impose sanctions on Russia if it doesn't accept a ceasefire, and of course the Americans to help the Europeans with the peace force and to supply weapons to Ukraine to make sure that it stays in the fight.
Jamie Shea, much appreciated. Thank you for your time today.